Hi everyone, my name is Charles Waweru, talking from Nairobi, Kenya, here at the Kaya at Verst Carbon's headquarters. And I'm here today with an interesting gentleman from an interesting company. We're looking to see what can we do more and better in improving the integrity of carbon markets. I'll allow my fellow colleague here to introduce himself and we see what's up at the Kaya.
Thanks, Charles. I'm George. I'm here from BeZero Carbon. Landed in Kenya yesterday, so we've been here for 2 days, met some great clients, and interested to have this conversation.
Great. So I'm just curious, what is BeZero? Are you asking me to be nothing?
So BeZero Carbon are one of the main ratings agency for carbon markets. I've been there for about 4.5 years, and we're a company of about 5 years old. Pre then, carbon markets operated in a way that wasn't necessarily transparent or scalable. And so you had people purchasing credits but not caring or knowing so much about the different variations in quality to do with these. So each project trades a ton and sells that ton to clients for various purposes. But in actuality, what we were seeing was that not every ton is necessarily equal. Okay. And so we entered the market to say, how can we create fungibility in this space so every buyer knows the commodity that they're actually purchasing and can then inform their decisions in terms of how they're offsetting correctly. So we've got a rating scale, and that goes from D, that translates to the lowest likelihood of delivering a ton, to AAA, which is the highest likelihood. And I think it's a 8 or 9 point scale.
Now, for the layman or for an upcoming developer in the ecosystem, how can you tell them is your difference between BeZero and, let's say, the standards like gold standard and, let's say, the so-called VVBs? What's the difference in these three entities?
So the standards wear a lot of different hats in terms of it helps projects register, and it creates a space for them. It defines the methodologies that they should be following. When a project comes about, they might create it and say, look, we're following this methodology. And what a VVB does is it comes in and it checks certain parameters are in accordance with the methodology. And so a standard sets what you need to do. An auditor says, are you following it? BeZero aren't necessarily looking at compliance with methodologies, but actually, because methodologies allow for quite a lot of flexibility, they don't fit every use case accurately as they should. And so when BeZero come in, we take it with an objective lens on, although the methodology permits this, it's about going beyond that. Is this number likely to be accurate? And so, there's often a tension there where you've got project developers saying, look, well, what I've done is in accordance with the methodology, and our argument isn't, we're not disputing that. It's just whether or not the methodology should allow you to permit this because it may not be entirely accurate.
Okay. So often I hear then the third rating agencies such as yourselves, they help promote transparency and integrity. How does that exactly work over and above what a VVB should ideally be able to do as well? Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's, again, drawing it back to the last question around how the roles of different parts of the ecosystem fit together. VVB standard defines methodology, VVB checks it. What we're doing is trying to highlight whether or not values that are actually applied align with scientific consensus or even actuality. What we do is all of our ex post ratings are publicly accessible. And so when we have rated a project, it's not behind a paywall. Anyone can log into our website and see what rating that project has got. And that's trying to build scale in the market. So any buyer now can make a transaction with a rated project and know the risks that it's exposed to. On our platform, if you're a subscriber, you can then go in and see what the reasons are underpinning that rating. And we also work with developers. So, when we rate a project, we'll reach out to them our client engagement team will say, look, we've rated this project, this is our assessment. And we welcome feedback from the developer as well. So it's not a one-way street. We try and listen to them, say, look, you guys maybe know your project better than us. Here is maybe areas we can do with some input, and we try and work with them there to make sure that we can defend our rating as they can defend their project.
You talked about ex post ratings are made public. And I assume there's an ex-ante rating, and where can one see this? How does one acquire this kind of data?
Yeah, so our ex-ante ratings, we've recently released some on our public platform, and you can go and see them. But typically, because of the nature of them, they're projects that are in their design phases. Okay. And so those assessments are usually done for developers who are trying to understand, look, I'm bringing this project to market. I want to know what the market might think of it if a rating ever comes around, ex post. Or it can be done from someone looking to, potentially get into an offtake, and that's before the credit has even happened. And so they're going, look, I want to know the risks that I'm exposed to. If this is going to deliver me tons, are there any credibility claims that I might be liable for? Okay. And so they're usually done privately. But what we started to do at the end of the process is say to whoever the client was, look, we are happy to publish this on our website so long as you are. And so we give them that option if it's developer or if it's the project. Look, we can deliver this report in full on our website so people can read it, understand the project, or it's up to you to use it as you see fit. And so you might see some on LinkedIn and stuff like that. Okay.
And is there a difference in which how you approach this, either for a VCM project or compliance project, compliance market project? Is there a difference in the scrutiny, or is all the same approach?
The level of scrutiny is considered the same. And it's again coming back to we've got quite a rigid framework in the assessments that we look at. So we look at additionality. Would this project have happened without the investment of carbon finance? Carbon accounting, have they issued the right number of credits and permanence? Will these credits or removals or avoided emissions remain permanent for the time that they've committed? Okay. And so that same framework is applied across both ex post and ex ante, as well as compliance and voluntary. And then there's the overlap, right, where we've rated projects that might be CORSIA eligible and cross over both thresholds. You can see that on our platform as well.
So will you ever say, given your experience, that there's anything like a perfect carbon credit or a perfect carbon project?
I've thought about this for a long time. And it's a bit of a cop-out. I don't think there is. In terms of a rating, you could see a AAA, and to you that might be perfect, right? You're just after a project that is completely additional, accounts for everything perfectly, and stores it permanently. And that's brilliant, and we have a handful of AAA rated projects. But then there's other dimensions that are important to a carbon credit as well. I mean, I think two main ones come to mind is community benefits. And so maybe you look at, a DAC project that's, doing all of those top things, but is it impacting the livelihoods of communities? And maybe to some people that means it's not perfect. On top of that, you have price, right? Is the world gonna solve the issue of climate change if we're all paying $1,000 per ton to sequester it? And there's a time and a place for it for sure, but to me that's not perfect. That's not practical. That's not the most efficient way to get to net zero and abate the problems that we might have in the future. I like the solutions that are affordable, that impact communities, but also have really high credibility. That's my philosophy. That's my philosophy. There's a lot of different philosophies out there, and debates around nature versus tech and avoidance versus removal, all of those things. But I'm, economic efficiency in terms of getting there.
Okay. So Kenya, for a country in the carbon market space, is very keen on clean cooking, be it the institutional level, even the household level. And I don't know of any other project besides EcoSafi that's been able to secure $35 per ton. So in my mind, it looks like the typical ideal way of doing clean cooking. So for the sake of those who might not be familiar with the project, as BeZero, what can you say some of those key things that made it to be top-rated projects, especially in clean cooking?
Yeah, so in terms of clean cooking, what we look for in additionality, and I'll run through our framework, is we want to look at a project that's distributing stoves that are not common in the region that they're operating in. And, in lots of parts of sub-Saharan Africa, you have people relying on traditional three-stone fires. And so in many instances, what we're looking for is a project that goes against common practice. In other parts of that is how they distribute those stoves. And so you have a lot of operators right now who are just giving stoves away for free. And that makes, financial additionality very strong in the sense that there is no other reason to undertake this business model without the carbon market. Now, there's other thoughts around there if that's like a sustainable thing given where the market is currently at, but that's like a really ringing endorsement of financial additionality. That's not to say if you're like subsidizing the stoves, you can't still have really strong additionality. You need to look at the business model and the environment that you're working in. In terms of, we look at barrier analysis as well, and so that's how, you know, when the technology that you're working with, is that actually affordable to households already, or are you overcoming a willingness to pay gap? Are you looking at how households actually use the device and actually trying to impact behavior change? And I would say they're like core parts of our additionality framework for cook stoves. In terms of carbon accounting, this is where, and additionality is usually strong for cook stoves, but carbon accounting is where things get a bit hairy and where there's been some concerns in the market. In terms of the baseline, we want to see a project that's one, got a really academically grounded understanding of what people are consuming fuels before your intervention, and if this is a fuel mix or very particular type, and it looks on maybe more on the conservative side in terms of how much fuel they're consuming. What we want to be able to see is look at your project and go, yeah, we've looked at academic literature and what you're saying aligns. It also comes into, you know, how you're monitoring and surveying things. And so is it you've derived your value just from like a couple household surveys before the project intervention, or is it that you're updating your baseline frequently by going into the households? Maybe you've got, you know, different KPTs running really large sample sizes to get to the eventual value you apply. We then want, you know, another particular consideration around these projects is how use is monitored, right? And you would often find projects that have distributing stoves, 100% of them are used 100% of the time. And again, it's like, that's not something we typically see grounded in academic literature. And so newer projects that are coming to the market are using things like stove use monitors that can tell when the stove's turned on and turned off, and use that to calculate their emission reductions rather than relying on implicit understanding. The final major thing for a cook stove project would be, and the one that comes to mind is FNRB, and that's been subject to a lot of scrutiny. And you know, you have legacy projects claiming 100% non-renewable biomass. Latest figures for most countries are around 30 to 50. And so again, that has like a massive bearing on a project's carbon accounting. And so permanence is stronger for these type of projects, but I think carbon accounting for at least those cases is what we're really looking at. Okay, good.
I'm trying to draw back to what you said about ex-ante ratings and ex-post ratings. So I get the picture that you guys have been able to see the initial intention of a developer. But then later on something happens and what was planned or intended was not the end result. Something might have improved or become worse. What do you think is usually the difference between what people say in the validated PDD and then a year or 2 years later when you verify, we're seeing there's some distortion? So maybe from clean cooking or even a follow sector, what are usually some of the common causes of the gaps of intention and reality?
I think it's quite easy to read a PD and make everything look simple. And so, you know, we've looked at cook stove projects in particularly hard regions, and you know, you read the PD and it looks like, yep, everything's like brilliant. We just need to distribute, I don't know, 3 million cook stoves. And when it's just written down, it looks like something you maybe wouldn't question. But when you get into the nitty gritty, you really start to understand, like it's so complicated. And the way this project, you know, and some projects have been set up is like, look, we need to distribute our stoves, but when we distribute them matters because we can't do it during rainy season because the roads are such, we're going to rural communities, so the roads are such poor infrastructure, we have to do it this. But the later we push it, the more we're shortening our crediting period, which means like we're going to be forced to go under a methodology transition, which means we're going to be issuing less credits. And so I think intentions are usually really strong from people. It's just understanding the complexities that come with it. Over the past like 3 years, one of the biggest shifts that has happened is this shift in focus on integrity.
Yeah.
And standards have now in all kind of enforced projects to really slash their issuance down from what were really high numbers to something that is maybe more grounded in truth. Okay. But that's kind of had a backward effect where developers now are really struggling with the cost of credits. Yeah. And the market is in a place where for buyers, it's typical to see credits of $2. But, you know, for us working in carbon markets, that probably doesn't price carbon correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that the intention of how many credits a project would deliver, and this is looking at delivery risk, is now, you know, thinking the world that it looks today will be the world that it looks tomorrow. Yeah. And I think people are starting to see that actually the way that the system changes is very fluid in carbon markets. And you need to be set up in a way that is sustainable. And that might mean, you know, you have a situation where giving out cook stoves 100% for free because that's what something mandates, maybe doesn't set you up in a manner if the carbon market falls over. And so it really is a double-edged sword that you're trying to balance.
For an investor looking to either put in some resources into a carbon project or even off-take some of these credits, what some of the opportunities you've been seeing as a third-party agency, as well as some risks that can be mitigated but are often ignored?
Yeah, so on the second part, when we deliver our ratings and when there are issues related to carbon accounting, that's when there are issues that are quite easily mitigated. Yeah. They're easily mitigated if, one, the developer and the off-taker can have a conversation where they go, look, we can't give you these credits unless you up the price. And that's a discussion that's completely separate to BeZero, but I think that's a relationship that being here in Africa, we've really sensed is, you know, this tension between integrity and cost. Okay. And so when we flag issues to do with carbon accounting, from a ratings agency perspective, you can, you know, our benchmark for FNRB is the MOFAS figure. Project applies that, its issuance goes down, risk comes down as well. Okay. And that's where I think, you know, that's how risk can be mitigated. But in some instances, you know, maybe not every project has a ceiling of AAA, because sometimes there's things you just can't do. Yeah. And I think particularly if you look towards additionality, that's something that is harder to, you know, carbon accounting is generally more grounded in facts and numbers, whereas additionality is more of a conceptual, theoretical problem that can change over time. And so I think gold standard's starting to do interesting things around like a downward adjustment factor that accounts for a technology transition. Yeah. But on the developer side, it's difficult to go to a standard and say, look, we want to do something about this, but it's not in the methodology. Yeah. And I think additionality issues where it's harder to make a change to a project that is impactful and makes business sense. Okay. And so, yeah, I think that there's often a lot to learn in the carbon accounting realm, but in the other areas, it is a bit more tricky.
Okay. And for the developer, any specific areas they need to prioritize to get the very top ratings, if possible?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of tools on our platform that try and help people understand before you go through the process of a full rating what your project actually looks like. And so we've got pre-rating score that means you can input your core parameters of your project to understand where it probably benchmarks in a BeZero framework. I think in terms of additionality, it's like really strongly justifying that this wouldn't happen without carbon finance and making it clear in public documents why this is. Is it because the business case makes no financial sense? Like, make sure that's reflected in your PD. Is it because you're not, you know, and again, coming back to cookstove projects, you often have them saying we distribute cookstove projects to the entirety of Kenya, for example. But, you know, that could be anywhere. That could be Nairobi. That could be somewhere very rural. And actually, you know, identifying why you focused on that area and the fact that why that area is necessarily harder for a conventional business to reach is a really important thing. I think in carbon accounting, it's really about making sure that your numbers that you're coming up with at the end of the day, you can point to the literature that backs up what you're saying.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, the amount of fuel that's being consumed, make sure you can point to an academic study that says this. Or if you look at peer projects, right? If you look at 5 other projects, are you applying a number that's like 20 times higher than theirs? Yeah. Or is it, you know, lowest of the bunch? And I think that that's something to really think about. And then in permanence, and that's where it is quite tricky, is how are you making sure that your project is protected against natural risks?
Yeah.
And is this you're introducing, you know, mitigation measures, fire breaks? If it involves communities, how are you making sure that they are engaged and stay engaged? Because if they don't, and if you don't have a like really strong relationship with them, stakeholder engagement, benefit sharing, those stakeholders drop out and your project falls apart. And then the final part of that puzzle would be how much you're contributing to the buffer pool. And altogether, what that's trying to say is not that a carbon rating is not saying you're methodology compliant or you can't do this. It's saying a rating is there to reward those who go above and beyond, because the reward at the end of the day is this opens up a pool of buyers willing to pay a higher price if there's, you know, trust involved there.
Okay. So at the end of the day is the ratings will only make more sense by way of building the trust between the developers and those who want to take this credit as well.
Exactly, and we've had, you know, a bunch of conversations today where this has been really apparent, like prices for credits in the market between $2 and $3, and developers that we've spoken to say, like, look, we're not against, you know, making haircuts to our project, but the project still needs to make financial sense. Yeah. And the only thing that makes up that delta is credit price, you know, every credit being priced higher. You take a 4 times hit on issuance, you want a 5 times, you know, increase in credit price just to make sure. And that is the role of a rating, is to say, like, look, if you go above and beyond, you will be rewarded by the market. And it's creating that structure to actually incentivize people going above and beyond rather than just minimum service level. But there's still a trust element there. And we've seen it with like CCPs as well, people wanting, you know, look, we can go down the CCP route, but we don't want to do that until we know that we got a buyer lined up. Yeah. And I think that the market's still at this a bit of like, will they, won't they? Can we get developers and off-takers and spot buyers to all trust each other that, look, if what you really want is integrity, I'm willing to do that. Yeah. And that's what a rating does. And we've got it. I forget the exact numbers now, but it's every rung up the rating scale you go, there's like a 30 to 40% increase in credit price. Okay. And so for some projects, maybe it's not going to unlock anything because you did just follow the methodology, which is not your fault. The methodology allowed you to do that. Yeah. But for those projects that have been like, well, look, we took all the conservative measures we can, we took a massive haircut, doors will be unlocked by going through the pathway of rating. Okay.
For the next and last question, and please feel free to answer this as George and not as BeZero. Should the market be there forever? Or it must have a definite end? Tricky, but answers George.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Threatening my career. I would like to think there's a future out there where we don't need carbon markets, right? And that's to say that countries across the world have moved away from fossil fuels, and we live in a world where all countries are operating itself under a net zero framework. Will that world exist while I'm still alive? I don't think it will. And so I think a market mechanism is really important in terms of, you know, at least for now, until beyond north of 2050. Okay. One part of the market that we've been looking at is the use of coal-fired power plants in Southeast Asia. And if we operate all of those until their ends of economic lives, we've blown the carbon budget already. Yeah. And so, you know, that getting those offline before 2050, carbon markets are being used, you know, thought about in those circles. And so I think they're here for the foreseeable. That's not to say that they're completely perfect. They're certainly not, and they're maybe not a perfect concept, but they're maybe the best that we've got when we look at practical solutions. aid funding across the world has kind of dried up in the past year or so. This is a market solution to a problem.
Okay. Any parting shot? And it's a parting shot. Please tell us, how can we get in touch with BeZero?
Yeah, so I think if you go to our website, BeZeroCarbon.com, or contact us at contact@BeZeroCarbon.com, or find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'm sure to reply.
Parting shot?
Any
parting shot for us here in the carbon markets in East Africa?
Having been here for the past only 2 days, the ecosystem here is really strong. There's so many people with well-intentioned, really wanting to progress. The projects here are more often than not involve communities and people. And I think that's a niche to the African market. Is you've got cook stove projects that affect how people's daily lives. You've got another emerging sector in biochar that affects how the soil health and the use of fertilizers and the retention of water. And so I think here in East Africa there's a lot of potential. Kenya's really well positioned for CDR as well, so it's kind of it's been great to be here.
Thanks for stopping by. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.